folks. Hello, people. This is Andreas teaching you how to use Camera Raw in Photoshop Camera Raw. Yeah. So, I'll just teach you the basics of using Camera Raw, and for those of you who do not know what Camera Raw is, it's, it's a raw file format is what you shoot in. If you shoot files on your DSLR camera, you can choose to save it as JPEG, which is the standard file compression, but you can also choose to shoot in RAW format. You can choose to shoot in both formats at once also. So why even shoot pictures in RAW format, and what the hell is RAW format? Okay, so to view my my RAW files, it's a good idea to have a program installed called Bridge. And I haven't actually updated mine, so you see that mine is called Adobe Bridge 2017. You can update it so it's called 2018. Some of you have not downloaded Bridge yet, and that's okay. You can open this from, you can open it from your desktop as well. I'm gonna open mine from Bridge just to tell you some of the cool stuff about Bridge. So I'm just gonna drag one of my pictures. It's a DNG file, and that's typically a RAW format. The cool thing about DNG format is that, no, let's not talk about that. But it will be named either DNG if it's shot in RAW format, or it will be called CR2, or it would be called CR, or in some cases it's actually just called RAW. Raw, like in something you eat. I ate it raw. Raw. And that's actually the point of calling it raw. That's because it's goes back to the original. It's the raw file, the original file, which remembers a lot of stuff from the camera settings. So you can actually, after having shot the picture, go back and change some of those camera settings. Yes. But okay, so what happens if I choose to open a raw picture inside of Bridge or from my desktop? Well, if it's a raw picture, what happens is I double click it, and then it will simply open up in Camera Raw, which is a Photoshop application. In older versions of Photoshop, you had to install it as a plugin, but now it's just included as part of the Photoshop program. Even though it's called Camera Raw, we are actually still in Photoshop. You see up in the top it says Photoshop CC. So we're inside of Photoshop. Even though you don't want to admit it, we are inside of Photoshop. Okay, so it looks a bit different when you're inside of a RAW file. There's the tools, for example, are at the top. Instead of a content menu, we have the toolbar at the top. On the right side, we have, instead of panels, we actually have adjustments we can adjust. And at the bottom, we have some different preview menus and some zoom options. At the left, we have Save Image, which will save it as a raw image. We can also click Open Image, and then with these changes that you made to the picture, it will open up in Photoshop and look like this, the changes you made in the raw format.
But it's not going to change the raw file.
No, the raw file is protected. The raw file will never be changed. So you can always go back in time and say, Camera Raw defaults, boom, and then it will just reset back to what it was when it was originally shot. But you can say Save Image and save it as a new file name, and then it will remember itself as the changes you made to the picture. So if I say Save Image now, it will make a new RAW file that looks like this, and that will be the new standards for that RAW file. But let's just check out some of the advantages of using Camera Raw. So one of the advantages, as I just described, is that it's non-destructive, which means that you can edit it as much as you want without any damages or permanent changes being, nothing will be permanent. You can always change it back. It's very easy to work in Camera Raw. So when you open it up, it will just, it will seem very intuitive to work in it. You can also open up JPictures in Camera Raw and TIFF formats. So even though it's only supposed to be working with RAW formats and DNG formats, or whatever you call it, CR2 or whatever, you can even open up JPEG pictures and TIFF pictures in RAW, in Camera Raw. There's not much point of doing so, but it's a possibility. You will not change a JPEG into being a cool RAW by opening the JPEG in RAW. It will not go back and remember what the camera settings were, and be able to change them as if you went back in time and shot the picture once again. JPEG will not be able to support that, but a RAW file will be able to support that. So you can actually venture back in time and change settings. If you're unhappy with how you set some of your values on the camera, then you can actually just go back in time and change those values. Not all values. Okay, so yeah, and then there's two other points that's not really important. So let's see what you can actually do to a picture in RAW format. But actually, before we do so, I'm gonna double click this folder called Raw Lens, and the one called Raw Compare. I'm gonna open this one. I'm actually gonna open both of them, and to open both of them, I'll just click one and I'll shift click the other one so they're both selected, and then I'll go to File and Open in Camera Raw. That's called in Bridge. That's Command R. So I don't have to go up here all the time. I could just click Command R, and on a PC that's Control R as RAW. Okay, so when you have several pictures open in Camera Raw, you can just click on the left over here, and I don't know if you see it, but if I click between the two, they're identical, by the way. This is the same picture shot on a camera, this camera has been set to shoot a picture both in RAW and JPEG at the same time. You can always set your DSLR camera to shoot both RAW and JPEG at the same time. Then it will make two files, and that's really the greatest way of comparing what JPEG is compared to RAW. Simply set your camera to shoot in both formats at once. And I don't know if you noticed, but it seems like there's a lot more contrast on the JPEG image. And you would say probably that means it's a better picture. No, because that's the compression that's starting to create contrast where there's actually no contrast. I don't know if you see it, but the lighthouse.jpg seems as if there's more contrast in this picture, while the RAW file seems as if there's less contrast. A way of actually seeing what is happening to this picture is by zooming in to an area, and just perhaps I'll actually go down here of the picture, and we'll notice it's very hard to see on the projection. It's much easier to see on your own screen. But if I click on this, you see down at the bottom we have something called image 1 out of 2, and there's arrows, key brackets to switch to the next picture. And if I just zoom in again, why did it not zoom the same level? Okay, so it's because by accident I had not selected both of my pictures. So if both of these pictures are selected, then I can just scroll through my picture and I can switch between these two, and it will zoom in at the same point and match the location. And we'll be able to see that the raw picture, it seems like there's actually less tones in here, but actually there's more. It's because the JPEG picture makes the mid-tones even darker, or the light tones even darker, whereas the raw picture has a lot of subtle tones, really a lot of finesse in this area. And if I want to show you actually that the raw photo has more detail, I could actually just adjust the contrast to either being lower or higher, and perhaps actually also adjust the exposure. And you'll notice if I adjust the exposure, you'll start seeing a lot of detail level in this area. Let's try doing the same with the other picture. I'm simply selecting both of them again, and I'll try just adjusting the exposure on this one downwards, and perhaps go in to the center of the object, and simply switch to the other one. And you'll notice that that the detail level, you see, it's kind of like in the JPEG. I'll actually just adjust the exposure even more, perhaps add some contrast. See, on the JPEG picture, it's starting to look more and more like some 8-bit gaming adventure. It looks very noisy in the JPEG version, but if I go to the other version, you'll notice that we see extreme detail in these areas. Can you see that this is detail, whereas on the JPEG picture, it's simply noise. The JPEG picture does not know what's actually in this area. It seems like the white areas, when I'm trying to darken them down, it doesn't know what is one tone compared to another, whereas the raw picture had a lot more tones registered, so it's actually telling a lot more about the texture of this light tower, this lighthouse. So it will contain much more information, the raw file, about how it actually looks, this lighthouse. You see, it looks much more like fiction. This seems like it's some added effect on the JPEG picture, whereas it seems more realistic when it's the raw file I'm using. Can you see the... Yeah, okay. So the raw file contains much more of the true picture, you know, where the JPEG has compressed a lot of details. So when I start adjusting inside of the Camera Raw settings, you'll notice that yes, the JPEG perhaps looks okay when it has standard settings, but when you start adjusting some things in here, the JPEG picture will not know what was originally there. So it's a good idea to shoot in RAW if you really want perfection, especially if you're shooting in dark environments or very bright environments. It will the RAW file will have registered much more light tones from white to some mid-tone. It will register many more tones in between than the JPEG image will. And that's because JPEG tries to save space, so the file doesn't take out too much space on your computer by actually removing specific colors and tones. Okay, so I'll just restore these to Camera Raw defaults, and you notice that if I have both selected at once, it will make these changes to both of the pictures. So when I select two over here, it makes changes to both. So when these two are selected, I'll change both of them to being dark, for example. This means that I can select 100 pictures over here, and it will change all of those 100 pictures to becoming, let's say, more yellow. So if you shoot a lot of pictures in the wrong, ambience, the wrong lighting, you could just go in, select all pictures, and just say, okay, they are shot too yellow, so I'm gonna make them cooler. And then it will change all of them at once. Okay, so if I want to see how this looks in Photoshop, I can then click Open Image, and it will open it up in Photoshop. And then in Photoshop, you can edit it as normal. When you put it into Photoshop, it no longer has raw functionality. That means it cannot somehow remember back to the camera values. So when you put it in Photoshop, you need to be sure that you're done adjusting the camera raw values, because you cannot go back. Of course you can go back. You can always go back to Bridge and then open it again and so on. But if you edit the Photoshop picture, if you start doing adjustment levels and blah blah blah, and then decide, oh, by the way, I forgot something inside of Camera Raw, then you cannot go back with this picture. At least you can open it in Camera Raw, but it will not remember back to the camera settings, you know, if you want to change them again. Okay, I'm gonna close this and open up my Bridge again to just, let's see what's cool about Bridge. So let's open up the one called Rock DNG. Bye bye. This is a perfect example of when a picture is shot with perhaps too low exposure. Inside of Photoshop, you have some limited exposure controls, whereas you have much more control over the exposure inside of Camera Raw. So out here on our right, we can see that there's different things we can adjust here. In this case, I would adjust perhaps the exposure to become brighter. And normally what happens if you adjust a JPEG picture, especially if it has a low compression, is that instead of actually more details coming out, suddenly a lot of pixels become just totally white. And they start actually looking not realistic, as if the picture is damaged. But you see, you can actually, with a raw picture, you can go insanely high up without it looking as if it's damaged pixels. You remember we were adjusting exposure some blocks back in Photoshop, where you actually saw that adjusting exposure would quickly make the picture look unrealistic. But you see, in this case, it's still looking okay when I adjust the exposure up. So it's because it remembers all the way back to the original picture. It has a lot of details stored in memory. So you could actually, it's like going back in time and shooting the picture just brighter. So it's kind of like intelligent pixels. I just invented that word. Yeah. Okay, sorry. So if I wanted brighter, I could adjust the brights, the exposure. I could also set the highlights, the lightest areas, to become even brighter, the shadows to become even darker or brighter, and you can just, you know, just keep changing it until it becomes exactly like you want it to. So let's say we want this to be daytime. If I go back to the original, if I say Camera Raw defaults, you'll notice that it looks like it's nighttime. But I can quickly change this into looking like it's a realistic picture where it's shot at daytime. You see, this picture does in no way look as if it is manipulated. So this actually looks like suddenly what seemed like nighttime before is suddenly daytime. So you really have a lot of intelligent pixels working for you here, trying to figure out how should this look if it was shot with some different values on my camera. Also, one way of altering your picture is also that you can actually pull, you know, you can click and drag at these mountains up here called the histogram. You can just click and drag at them, and you'll notice that if I click at one point and drag it, it will say it's adjusting shadows. If I try the mid of it, it will say that it's exposure that I'm adjusting. If I try dragging out here, it will say that it's highlights I'm adjusting. So you can also do it more intuitively. Just simply drag these mountains around, this histogram, and perhaps it's a good idea to try actually to make balance between these. And perhaps it will say that there's more green and blue in the darker areas. Well, then I can try adjusting these so perhaps there's a better balance to it. But you know, the best thing to do is look at the picture and see how the picture is affected. So if I wanted my picture to look a bit more wet and moist, perhaps I'll add yellow and add green, and then it seems like I'm more in like a swampy area. But this picture still looks realistic, even though I'm adjusting it very much. And you'll notice in Photoshop, a lot of times photos seem as if they're not realistic anymore when you change hue saturation, for example. But here you can really go far before it starts looking wrong. Of course, if it's a person and the skin color is no longer a normal skin tone, but instead you made the person green, of course that would not look realistic. So of course it also depends on the picture. Yeah. Okay, so if your picture is too dark or too white, you can actually tell your picture to inform you if there's too much brightness in the picture. Let's say I'm gonna adjust my whites up to the top. You'll notice that my screen shows red. And that's actually because I told my picture that I want to see if there's too much highlights in some areas. That means there's just plain white. There's no other tone than white. And this is a damaged picture. This is what I showed you some pictures that has damage in them. That's if it only registers true white or true black. Then that means you can, by brightening up the pictures, it will not get any more mid-tone dark values, or by darkening the picture, it will not do anything else than just darken the total white, so it just looks more gray. So there's no mid-tones in here, there's just pure white. So if that happens, if it gives me this warning, and I can just click it, I can click this white pointer up here, you see it, it's at the top of your screen at the right. If I click it, it will tell me if there's too much white in the picture. No mid-tones, just white. And the same goes for black. If I click that, it will show if there's too much black. And you notice that it doesn't say anything to black, and that's because there's not too much black. So if I instead set my exposure very low and I click this black, you'll notice that blue starts appearing. Blue starts appearing inside of the rocks. That's a warning telling you that it has created true black inside of the rocks. Meaning that if I brighten this picture up, there will be no tones to brighten up. It will just be true black. So it has destroyed tones inside of the picture. And a picture that looks nice is one where you can actually fetch tones inside of the darkness or fetch tones inside of the brightness, and adjust them so you can see the mid-tones coming out of them. But if it's just totally flat black, you can also say it's like a flat color. It's like when I fill something in Photoshop, I say Alt backspace and fill it with red. It's the same here, it's just filled with white or filled with black in those areas. So I often have my warnings switched on just to see if my picture has too much black in some areas or too much white in some areas, and then I can start adjusting these so it doesn't have these warnings. You see, now it's starting to look better, and perhaps I should adjust some of the others as well, and perhaps add some exposure, but now it's too much exposure perhaps, and I can just start changing it And you'll notice now it's not complaining anywhere inside of the picture. So I actually almost always switch these two indicators on, the one that shows true black and true white. Okay, so we also have something quite similar to hue saturation down here in clarity, vibrance, and saturation. And this is actually just when you choose that this is kind of like changing your f-stop value, the clarity. It makes everything much more detailed in its pixels. If you choose to put the clarity higher, you see the detail level is very much different when you have a high clarity value compared to a low clarity value. So it's kind of like the clarity, a minus value in clarity is a very low f-stop value, whereas a plus value in clarity is a very high f-stop value. It's not exactly the same, but it has almost the same effect on the picture. Vibrance is how the midtones appear in the picture, how much color is added to the midtones. And sometimes a picture looks a bit boring, then you can just add vibrance and it will become somewhat more exciting to look at. Saturation, watch out. It will often look not as real. Sometimes it's cool for a poster, you know, where it has to be extreme colors. Well, then you can turn up the saturation. And of course, the saturation will be even more wild if you add more temperature to it. So sometimes it's also a combination of using more things to get a result. Yes, I think I'll, yeah, okay, so before I close this picture, I'll tell you that we have a lot of different panels here. We have basic, yeah, and then we have tone curve. That's like curves in Photoshop. Basically, it's adjusting levels, but having control over yeah, kind of like having control with curves in Photoshop. And you can simply just drag these around and adjust how it looks by using curves. I don't suggest this, so I'm just going to click undo, undo. And remember in Photoshop, undo is Command Alt Z or C. Yeah. Like that. We also have sharpening. You can make the picture more sharp. If there's noise in the picture, you can try to remove that. We can also adjust how the picture would appear if it's gonna be grayscaled. You just click convert to grayscale up here, and then you can adjust the values down here. If you don't click convert to grayscale, it's not gonna do anything to your picture. So that would be truly just you wasting your time. So saturation as well, luminance, all of these can be changed, but it's only good if you're gonna use it for grayscale. Split toning, even more control over how the colors will appear in your picture. Lens correction, that's not good for this picture. I'll show what that's good for afterwards. Effects, that's if we have some fogginess to the picture, then we can try to remove the fog from the picture. And you know, there's just, instead of me going through all of this, you know, you can just try experimenting with the different things in here. If I think this is a nice picture, I could save it so it becomes a new RAW file so I can always go back and edit it again. Like I said, a RAW file is non-destructive. You can always go back to other settings with it. So none of these changes are permanent to the RAW file. But if you like these settings that I made now, you might as well save this as a new RAW file. Because if I close it, it will remember itself as having other camera raw defaults. But if I save the image, it will remember itself as having those new Camera Raw defaults, the settings I've made for this picture now. But even though I saved it as a new Camera Raw, I can always change it back, you know. I can always change it back. So it's non-destructive. You can always go back in time. The only time you cannot go back in time is when you open it in Photoshop, of course. But still, the Camera Raw file does still exist, so you can always go back to it, the original file. But when it's open in Photoshop, you cannot go back in time. You cannot go back to the raw format. This file here is permanently changed as it looks now. But don't worry, you still have the raw file. You know, it's not like the raw file is deleted from your computer unless you accidentally do it yourself. Okay, so there's one more thing I'm going to show you in Raw, and then I'm going to tell you to go home. So you'll probably be rejoicing. You'll be happy. You'll be like, hey, Christmas is soon coming. Yippee, we're going home to our home countries. Okay, that's cool. So I'm going to show you two pictures. There's one called Door. We're going to open that first. Afterwards, we're going to look at the one called Courtyard. And you can try experimenting with the two others when you get home, if you got nothing else to do with your life. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to open this one up, door.dng. You notice that this picture, the building seems like they're falling backwards. So in Camera Raw, you're able to correct this. You could actually also do this in Photoshop, but it would probably be a bit more precise in Camera Raw, again, because it remembers original values from when you shot the picture. Okay, but how could we straighten this picture up? We're going to use something called the Transform tool, which is located up here in the toolbar. There's a lot of tools here. There's actually, you know, crop tool. There's changing colors in picture tools. There's removing red eyes. There's, you know, you can also remove spots. So those things that you're used to doing in Photoshop, you can do those in Camera Raw as well. Yeah, but I'm gonna use this one called Transform tool, and what I'll do is I'll try to tell it what needs to be straight. So we see a pipe going down here. So this is probably not 100% straight. So I'm going to click and drag, and I'm going to tell it what is straight. So what I'm actually doing by dragging this line, which is not 100% vertical, is that I'm telling the photo this needs to be 100% vertical. It will not do anything before I set the next line. So I'm going to tell it over here as well that this is going to be a straight line as well. And when you place two lines, it will then straighten out the picture. So you can also set horizontal lines. So if I want this to be a straight line as well, I can just do it like this. This needs to be straight, and it's probably easier just to do it like this, because those frames are not at the same level. So I could click it right here. And if I wanted to be more precise, perhaps I could put it right here. And you know, then it will start straightening more and more things out. But just be certain that you place them correctly, because now actually it's starting to make the left side of the picture straight, but everything on the right side of the picture is starting to look like shit. So if anything goes wrong, you can also just click clear guides, and then it goes back to being the original. So I think instead I'll actually try just to drag a line right here, and perhaps drag a line up here, and perhaps even drag a line right here, and see if that, and that really fucked the picture up. So I'm gonna clear those again.
Is there any kind of that tool in Photoshop, or we have to use
Yes, there is a tool like that in Photoshop, which I teach in second semester. I think I'll just put it all the way over here, and perhaps all the way over here, approximately. Let's see what happens if I put it here. Oh, nice! It's almost getting there. So, and if you suddenly decide that you need to change it just a bit, you can go back and adjust some of these, and you'll notice that perhaps if you look at the road down here, the sidewalk, you can see how it is adjusted when you adjust this right up here. So I'll probably, you know, adjust this until the sidewalk starts to look correct. If you need to fine tune it, you can also change this one over here called vertical, and it will simply tilt your picture until you're happy with it. And you could change horizontal. And no, you cannot look around the corner. And yeah, you have a lot of choices here when it comes to making it look more precise compared to what is realistic for you. You know, it's much better to have a picture like this, perhaps. I'll just click enter when I'm happy, than having a picture that looks like this. If you want to view how does it look now compared to how does it look before, you can click cycle between before after views. That's located down here at the bottom. If I click once more, you can see that it's actually going to show half of the picture in what it looks after and the other half in what it looks before. And you can click again to see them above each other, and again and again and again and again. You notice the last one here is where the top is before and the bottom is after. So you can also straighten pictures out using Camera Raw, and I'm just going to do it with this courtyard picture as well. It's kind of like in this picture there's nothing that's straight, and perhaps that's, you know, a charm. Perhaps you want it to look like that. But again, you can also try to straighten that out by saying, I want this sidewalk to be straight. Right here. And perhaps I would like this to be up. And you'll notice then it will try to straighten it out. So this looks as if it's totally straight. And I can just adjust one of these points as well, just to make it even more as I want it. And perhaps say this needs to be straight as well. And click OK. And okay, so if I'm not entirely happy with this, I could just click this tool once again, and I could try just tilting it a bit. And I think perhaps this is more to my liking, because now the ground seems as if it's more horizontal, perhaps actually like that. And you have crop tool in here, so it's not really that hard to make a cropping depending on how you made the picture. Yeah, I could probably have adjusted it a bit more to make it look better. But this way you can adjust lines to become straight if they were skewed or somehow tilted. Right now it actually seems like the buildings are falling downwards to the left. That was a basic introduction to how to use Adobe Camera Raw and actually some of the benefits that are in using Camera Raw. We'll talk more about Camera Raw in professional use on second semester. And in January we'll go visit the photo room so you can try out lighting and perhaps shooting a few pictures of products or your classmates. That is it for today. Have a nice day, everyone. See ya.